Yeah, so the book, the format of the book is that Eileen, the original Eileen Sullivan, she is talking to Gladys at the Chicago Art Museum of sorts.
The Museum of Science and Industry.
Yes, the Museum of Science and Industry, and that the fairy castle is going to be exhibited, right? And it's going to be exhibited, but it's also going to be included with like an audio tour type
Yeah.
of thing. Tell us a little bit about the way you set it up. So it's like she in the current, which was maybe I think 1968,
Hmm.
right? She's talking to Gladys, who doing the transcribing and the audio tape and all of that, and then it goes into her like longer memories of her time. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about why you decided to make the format like that, and then
Yeah.
if I said it correctly as far as how it goes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm a big structure person.
Mhm.
To me, novels are very architectural. Like I often can just sit down and write a poem and I don't have a plan, I don't have premeditation, I have a topic and I just like let it rip and
Mhm.
it goes good places. It's not to say like when I'm writing my own poetry, I do revise. When I'm doing poems while you wait, I don't. When I'm writing an essay, I don't always have a plan. I have a topic and then I kind of like quilt it together
Mhm.
as it may go. Whereas I can't imagine, I know some people do, and I think that's awesome, and I would love to have the experience someday, but so far my mind just
Mhm.
doesn't relate to long form fiction in this way. But
Mhm.
I say architectural because it's like you couldn't just like build a house with no plan. Like to me, writing a novel without an outline or a plan or a structure
Uh-huh.
is like rolling up to an empty lot with a bunch of lumber and being like, I'm gonna build a house. And it's like, I mean, maybe, but it's gonna be garbage. It's gonna be like
Right.
unlivable just like piles of wood. Like, no, you're not. And that's how my mind relates to fiction. And so I always need like a blueprint before I start
Mhm.
building. And so, like in Lillian, it was the walk. Like that has a similar split structure where it's like 1984, and this, octogenarian woman is walking through New York on New Year's Eve, but being set adrift back over her memories of how she got to the city, her rise, her fall. And then
Mhm.
Cher and Major Whittlesey, similar structure where you've got Cher the pigeon stuffed in the Smithsonian and sort of retrospecting
Mhm.
into, how did I end up in this museum? Like what caused me to be a hero? And then, Major Whittlesey is, on a boat, on a cruise ship going toward Cuba, planning to take his own life because he can't bear to go on with his like survivor's guilt and PTSD. So I always need like a frame. And so with this book, I was very excited when I was like looking at the castle and being like, oh my God, I need to write about this because it was a literal blueprint. Like it was not
Yeah.
just like a metaphor. It was like a
Mm.
blueprint of a structure, a house. And she always called it her dollhouse. People now call it the fairy castle because dollhouse
Uh-huh.
seems inaccurate, but she thought of it as a dollhouse. And so a dollhouse that would never have dolls because the fairies the fairies live in it.
Mm.
So anyway, I knew early on, I was like, oh my gosh, this is a great occasion of the telling, is that, this woman, this old silent movie star in the 60s who hasn't been famous for decades is now going to be asked to record this audio guide that the purpose of it is to just talk about the rooms, just to be like, okay, we're in the
Mhm.
library. Here's all these books by, Edna Ferber and Eleanor Glynn. And, here's a chair where a little fairy boy likes to read with his feet in the air. It's stuff like that. But then I was thinking, well, if you're doing this, you're probably also like drifting back over the
Yeah.
life you had when you built the thing or all the people who
Mhm.
gave you the items. And so, yeah, I just was so excited to have the Gladys frame because I just thought that was a great way to like work the castle in, but also get her whole life story in.
Love flashbacks. Absolutely love flashbacks. And I love the way that it's set up with the chapters for each room,
Yeah.
in the house. And I love to, without, I mean, we're not going to give away the ending, but I love how, she's what, 66, I guess.
Yeah.
I love how the flashback, it's not like, oh, it's all over. She's not like
Yeah.
the ancient person like in Titanic, the one who's telling the
Yeah.
story. Right? She's still got a life ahead of her, and it's like it's not, it's not like, oh, like it's not like on her deathbed type of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Because
something
I
cool
love,
about that.
yeah, I actually love the movie Titanic. It's so fun.
Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, totally. And I also love the movie Sunset Boulevard. So no shade to that
Mm,
either. But, I didn't want to write this Norma Desmond thing where it's this, kooky old Miss Havisham who's like,
right,
back
right,
when I was in my
right.
20s, I was beautiful and had a life. And now I'm this
Yeah.
wizened hag just waiting to die.
Uh-huh.
I don't like it.
Hmm. Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, chapter one is the Magic Garden. We talked about the format, by rooms. And I want to say it's Adela. Adela was her Perez Hilton. I don't know, her like,
Yeah.
right? Her
Yes, I
like
love that.
early gossip columnist. And
Yeah.
she's talking about writing in 1968, talking about writing, doing the memoir.
Yeah.
And and Eileen is still not sure about that. But just the idea of you can tell your own story. So she
Yeah.
starts talking about her Hollywood journey. Talk about her grandma going, believing in the fairies. You talked about that. And she was really at the age of, I don't know, 7 or 8, or maybe even younger. She went to a Peter Pan play,
Yeah.
and it was very like audience friendly. And it was basically like the fourth wall was broken. And I forget, in some way she like shouting out like save Tinkerbell, or
Yeah,
Tinkerbell, you
because
can do it, right?
yeah, because there's that thing in the play version of Peter Pan where there's that moment where Tinkerbell's dead, and then Peter's like, "If you clap, if you believe in fairies," and the audience is supposed
Yes.
to participate. But I have Irene
Yes.
like stand up on her chair and like
Hmm.
scream, and she's crying, and everyone's like, she steals the show without even trying.
Right. So just those shadows, those seeds of her getting into Hollywood, as we've talked about. It's basically like a favor from her uncle that gets her like the screen test, right?
Yeah. And
What?
that was like, so yeah, it's interesting because like what's wild is that Hollywood like kind of came out of nowhere, but it immediately was really difficult to break into. Like
Mm.
after the first few years, once it was established as an industry, it kind of developed the reputation it has today of like, sure, you can go out there with your pluck and your skill, but it would be so much better if somebody owed you a favor or you had,
Yes.
had some sort of nepotism
Hmm.
happening. And so yeah, so her uncle is like a newspaper guy, a journalist here in Chicago who is owed a favor by D.W. Griffith, and that's how she gets in. And I think a thing that I based on the real um, Colleen Moore is she had heterochromia, where you have two different color eyes, which
Hmm.
I think is so cool. I remember because I love that detail as a kid, like the wall text explained that, and
Mm.
I was just like, I was 8 years old. I was like, I didn't even know that could happen, that you could have two different color eyes. That's
Hmm.
bonkers.
Mm.
So, she had a screen test, but it wasn't a screen test that had anything to do with her ability because Griffith didn't care. She was just a payoff. He truly didn't care at all about her talent. And he thought she would just be there for 6 months on the contract and then, done.
Right.
So the screen test was just to make sure that her eyes didn't photograph imperfect or, confusing in
Mm.
film, and so I thought that was interesting too, the way like getting a chance to write a scene where like the only thing that stands between you and the career you want more than you've ever wanted anything in your life might just be this like weird physical
Yeah.
quirk.
Yeah, I love how the one taking the photos was just like, he was so indifferent to his task,
Mm-hmm.
so indifferent to it, just doing his
Yeah.
job. Right.
Yep.
From the fairly small amount that I know about early Hollywood, it does seem like, what you do really well in the book, it does seem pretty cool how like it really is a small world, right?
Yeah.
And this person knows this person, and this person's cheating with this one, whatever. But
Yeah.
D.W. Griffith, I'm like, okay, I think I know that name. And definitely, Birth of a Nation was,
Yeah.
was known to be like the most blatantly racist,
Yeah.
like what,
Just
rooting for the Confederacy, rooting for the KKK,
yeah,
basically.
insane, terrible propaganda.
Right, propaganda is the word.
Yeah.
But just the idea that he was one of the guys, he was one of the early directors, and if you wanted to make it, you kind of had to maybe be in one
Yeah.
of those movies, and so be it. Um,
Yeah, and I think,
but
I thought that was fun to write too, sort of this idea of like what kind of compromises and sort of the loss of innocence of like your childhood dream
right,
is one thing, and then the things you have to do to get it are usually not
sure.
totally pure. And she doesn't do anything horrible, but I do have her
No.
think about like, when I was 14, I wasn't thinking about it. But looking back now, I'm like, wow, that was a really bad movie, and that was a, you
Hmm.
know, problematic guy.
Problematic is the word.
Yeah.
But speaking of 14, the really interesting idea that at the time she says that, I don't know, psychologists or maybe just straight journalists were saying that like kind of the mental age of America is 14,
Yeah.
which I don't know if that's like the viewer, like if you could talk about that a little bit, because there is that, I mean, elephant in the room, or not even elephant in the room, is that there's so many older guys with young women in the book, right?
Yeah. Well, and
It's
I think
not
that
it's not fiction, right?
no, yeah, and it's the thing that, and we still see it, and you see it in
Of
casting, and you
course.
see it in life, and I think that was an interesting thing to try to write a character because I didn't want to in any way write it in a way that was like casting aspersions on women who made different decisions, but I
Mm,
thought it was really interesting to write a character who was like, I'm not going to do that. And partly I'm not going to do that because that's my idea of the ethics I want to have as a
mhm,
person, and I don't want to do it that way. But also part of it is like when she got to Hollywood, she wasn't that hot, like the
mm,
style, like the flapper wasn't in yet. And so I think that's another thing that was fun to write is like when she got to Hollywood, it was still this like Griffith inspired kind of
uh-huh,
Lillian Gish, Mary Pickford, the hourglass figure, the long flowing hair, just like the super, super feminine,
uh-huh,
um, classic beauty of that time. And then the flappers came in, and that was much more what, Irene has, which is the sort of, skinny, androgynous, sort of flat chested, like,
uh-huh,
bobbed hair, kind of, almost like girlish but boyish
mm,
sort of thing. And so, yeah, so it was interesting to put her in, like you said, this milieu where it's this small world where you see, people like, Charlie Chaplin, again,
right,
problematic, amazing actor, love so many things about him.
uh-huh,
But I mean, he was constantly going around with these like much younger women and getting
mm,
involved in these like weird scandals and power plays. And,
mhm,
like, I mean, sorry to any listeners, but
mm,
I just think it's weird when like an older guy is so committed to having like a teen girlfriend. I mean, it's just like I have, Doreen kind of think this about how, people want, like, they don't like women, they want girls. And part of why they
yes,
want girls is they're tractable and they're intimidatable and you can
uh-huh,
get them to do what you want. And I think it was fun to kind of write about that, not in a preachy way, but just in a like, what is this
right.
ever popular dynamic?
Definitely. Then and yeah, just ideas, going back to Peter Pan, right? This idea of yeah, I guess I mean you said it very well, just the idea of tractable,
Yeah.
flexible, amenable to, to suggestions and that kind of thing. And obviously she Eileen goes up against it. I mean, she's not like a 1970s like firebrand or 2000s, firebrand like feminist, but she's definitely a feminist
Yeah.
with all the positive connotations of it, right?
Yeah.
He
Well, and I
fights for
think
her.
too, we haven't, where I don't want to run out of time, but like a cool thing to me too was that so the oft made movie A Star is Born, it just keeps
Hmm.
getting remade, I think because
Yeah.
it does have these interesting elements, was based on the eventual marriage that she did have. She didn't end up with like a much, much older guy, but she did end up involved with first a publicity guy, and then he became her producer. And
Mhm.
that dynamic, kind of like you see in A Star is Born, this idea of like, well, you've got talent, but this guy is going to kind of be the one who's going to like get you over that last little hump and like get
Yeah.
you get you the fame or help you get the dream,
Uh,
even though he's really troubled and alcoholic. And so the gossip columnist, her Perez Hilton, I love that, Adela Rogers St. John's, watched this dynamic of this marriage that she had, her failed first marriage that just got very dark, and was taking notes all the time as gossip columnists do. And so she developed it into a treatment for a movie called What Price Hollywood. And
mm,
then that was the original scenario that got, remade over the years,
okay.
with like Janet Gaynor and, Judy Garland and on up to Lady Gaga.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, so I mean, she has some friends who are, big names, Lillian Davies, Mary Pickford. We talked about Hearst. Remind me of Hearst's lover or
Yeah, yeah, Marion Davies, who you
right.
see, I think if people know who she is now, I mean, a lot of people still love her because she was incredible, but
Mm.
she kind of got that Citizen Kane reputation. A
Ah,
Citizen Kane
okay.
is loosely based on Hearst. And so, in the movie, how he has that kind of, chippy, dim bulb girlfriend who he keeps trying to promote her
Mm.
career and she's just awful. Like that's kind of the caricature that became Marion Davies, which
Oh,
sucks
okay.
because if you go back and actually watch her, she's an incredible comedian. Like Hearst did try to put her in these like lace stuffed period pictures, which she's just
Mhm.
not good in because they're awful. But
Mm.
when she's just doing what she wants and being like the gifted comedian that she was, she's so funny. And I think that's
Mm.
one of the things that was fun to write is like, I feel like nowadays, if people know silent movies at all, they're like, Charlie Chaplin, Harold
Right.
Lloyd, Fatty Arbuckle even. And it's
Mm.
like those people are all so funny, and I'm not trying to take anything away from them, but I think
Mhm.
it's a bummer that like the female comedians don't get remembered. And there were so many like
Uh,
Zazu Pitts, and people just don't still don't give them a ton of credit. And I think
mm.
Colleen Moore slash, My Doreen was one of them. And I hope if people go, read the book and want, they like watch some of her movies. And I think if you watch her movies like
Mm.
Ella Cinders or Why Be Good, I mean, she's just so good at like slapstick and pratfalls, but also like witty comedy of manners and just, and she doesn't even have words. She's just like acting with her
Hmm.
whole body, and
Hmm.
it's so good.
Doreen, remind me who gives Doreen, who recommends the name for Doreen?
Yeah, it's her uncle who
It is her
wants her to
uncle. I thought
sound
so. Yeah, yeah.
super, super Irish.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she definitely gets a lot of help. I mean, even Jack Flanagan, who's the one who's on Constant Benders, her husband, who's
Yeah.
definitely an alcohol, I would say functioning alcoholic, but by the end he's not. She definitely, I mean, she gets a lot of help, but she works. I mean, she
Mhm.
has her own, her own agent, if you will. She's, does it all, including the almost, it almost could have been a career ender and, cutting her hair short for
Yeah.
the Flaming Youth movie. So as she moves up, she really finds her niche. You it reminded me of her work ethic when you're talking about the comedy because, she wanted to get into a couple comedies and she did and really, really worked hard and really, all the cliches, didn't need to ask a man for anything
Yeah.
and all of that, right?
Yeah.
Really had her own agency. And one of her big, I don't know if I'd say even a gamble, but was to be part of So Big, the Edna Ferber novel,
Yeah.
right? I feel like there's a couple layers here. I know you have a connection to Edna Ferber.
Yeah, yeah. So I got to write the introduction. So, Ferber's a great Chicago writer.
Uh-huh.
She spent a lot of time here and she wrote, So Big is set in Chicagoland. It's
Yeah,
set in
yeah.
the more agricultural, like now it's all settled in suburban, but at the time it was like, farmland.
Uh-huh.
Um, so she writes a ton about Chicago. And so, yeah, so to pick up both of those threads, so, So Big is her Pulitzer Prize winning novel about Selena Peake, this woman. It's a great novel. It's about this
Uh-huh.
woman who has like a real artistic temperament but ends up making a marriage that's not great and like dedicating herself to her son who's also not that grateful. And it's a beautiful, like very serious book about,
Mm.
kind of the waste of human potential that capitalism is so good at, but that
Oof.
capitalism is especially good at making women do.
Right.
Especially women who are poor or like not well resourced. And so
Mm.
anyway, so what I love is that, I get to depict this idea of kind of the struggle of like an actor wanting to choose her own material and make pictures that she's enthusiastic about
Mhm.
and, not just be a flapper. So that was fun to write, having her, go to the producers and kind of be like, this book is awesome. I
Yeah.
want to do it. And people being like, people don't want to see the flaming youth girl on top of a vegetable cart. She's like,
Mhm.
yes, they do. Um, so that was cool. And Edna Ferber is kind of famously grumpy. And she apparently at the time was sort of like, I don't think Colleen Moore can do it, and then
Mhm.
she saw it and she was like, you were amazing.
Mhm.
Because she's playing much older. But yeah, so Edna Ferber, I got to write, she has this other great novel called The Girls, which is super Chicago-y,
Mhm.
and Belt Publishing, Belt Magazine. And then Belt Publishing are, a magazine and then a publishing company that focus on the Rust Belt, and they're separate now. They used to be together. So I had written for Belt Magazine before, which is how they knew about me. And then they do
Mhm.
these reissues of classic books that have something to do with like the Midwest or the Rust Belt. And so when they were doing The Girls, they reached out to me and were like, do you want to do an intro to The Girls? And I said, yes. So I got to write
Yeah.
that. So yeah, I love,
Oh,
I don't know. I feel like Edna Ferber is underrated also. I mean, not every
okay.
single thing she did was good, but I think she kind of got, honestly, she suffered from, I think, anti-Semitism and misogyny.
Mm.
People just didn't want to take her seriously, even though she was really good.
Oh man. It's yeah, kind of lost my train of thought. So big Edna Ferber. And
Yeah,
like you said, with Eileen, just this idea of really being able to adapt in her career and adjust, which is so cool. This idea we were talking about earlier of like a small world
yeah,
where it's like just this idea that she even the lovers that she had, right? Like she'd see like so it's like one of her first lovers, Victor
yeah,
Marquis, who's a really interesting character. Um, and just this idea that she would they ended on amenable terms, I would say.
yeah,
And she'll see him later on and vice versa, and they kind of wink at each other, and it's kind of cool. But again, just this small world where
yeah,
so and so's gonna be in so and so's film, and that's now the husband of so and
yeah,
so and but also that they were really typecast, right?
hmm,
I wonder how much of the typecasting is what you know of just movies in general as let's say an amateur, and how much of that was the research into this particular time about how much they're like, okay, you already said a little bit of that, right? Like, oh, she wants to be in the Flaming Youth, she wants to be in this movie, So Big, but we remember
yeah,
her as such and such. Wonder how much of that was the director kind of assuming that, how much of it was done with like audience research. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, and my own research for the book, like there's some really great, books about the silent era. I feel like what
Mm.
happened kind of is that, the silent era, came and went, synchronized sound rushed in, and,
Right.
people either ended their careers or they kept going. A lot of people did different things, and but regardless of what happened to you personally, time moved on, the art form moved on. But then in like the 60s and 70s, there were people who kind of, particularly this film scholar Kevin Brownlow, who I think is
Mm.
great, were looking back and we're kind of like, oh shoot, like this was a thing that happened, and some of these people are still alive, because just like
Mm.
now with like true Hollywood story kind of
Mhm.
like scandally things, there's there was a lot of wreckage, a lot of human wreckage of people who just flamed out spectacularly in a Hollywood way that I think is still familiar. It's crazy, like
Mm.
J. Tim getting arrested in the Hamptons. It was stuff like that. People
Yes. I'm sorry, you said
people
J-Tim?
yeah.
Nice.
Yes, I did. Justin Timberlake. But it just so that there was that, but then there were some people who were extremely long-lived. And so, Brownlow in particular went back and interviewed a lot of them. And then Thames and Hudson, the British production company, did this amazing multi-part, Hollywood silent cinema
Mm.
documentary that was done in like TV episode sized chunks, and it was narrated by James Mason, which is reason alone enough to watch
Oh,
it.
okay.
I mean, I love James Mason. I would listen to him read the phone book, and him
Yeah.
narrating is like chef's kiss. But
Uh-huh.
so they captured some of these people. And so, it was fun to hear them talk about that kind of thing, like to your question of like how they ended up becoming, what role, or how they ended up with their little epithet, like the girl with the bee stung lips or the perfect flapper. And I think, very early on, Hollywood did kind of start becoming this star producing machine where it was like ease of marketing. They would find
Yes.
somebody's talent. So it wasn't irrespective of your talent, but it was sort of
Mm.
like, okay, you're Charlie Chaplin, you're going to be the little tramp forever and ever and ever. And like, good
Mm.
luck trying to do anything else. And luckily, I
Mm.
mean, Chaplin loved it. That's a perfect character. But I think, you hear stars talk about it now too, where it's like, if you want to break out or like grow in a role, there
Mm.
is a lot of like, people don't want to see Will Smith do that, or people don't want to see, you're this, don't be this. And so I think
Yes.
it was kind of like depressing, but also weirdly reassuring to see that that had gelled pretty
Uh-huh.
quickly.
Yes. The kind of starting to tiptoe, around the plot. The plot itself is
Yeah.
just so interesting. Like I said, I love just the idea of the flashback. That adds an extra level of profundity, I want to say. The fairy castle idea comes from her father in some ways.
Yeah.
He was quick with the belt as a kid when she was a kid. Not the most stable father, to put it lightly. I wonder if this was a sort of redemptive action for him. I kind of wonder what was in it for him. I don't necessarily mean that in a cynical way.
Yeah.
And also what was in it for her to really kind of like memorialize this fairy castle, to really kind of make it official.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was fun to write because that was, again, like I said, pure fiction. Like, again, respect to the
Hmm.
real family of Colleen Moore. By all accounts, her mom and dad were like super nice and super
Yes.
supportive, but for the book, not interesting. Um, so yeah, so that was a fun arc to write, because I think what interests me just as a person in my own life, and like, knowing my friends and their parents and just the way parenthood happens,
Uh-huh.
like I'm interested in the way any relationship can evolve. And I have, it's fascinating to me because I'm a teacher too. And a lot of my students are like, my mom's my best friend. And I'm like, I
Mm.
don't have any idea what that would even be like.
Mm.
But I do think it's interesting when you can become better friends with someone, particularly if they're like a family member or a parent. And so I was excited to have the chance not just to make him a static ogre,
Right,
bad
right.
dad stock character, but someone who is possible of growth and change.
Hmm.
And so I think, it was fun to write that, gradually over the course of her life, as she kept proving herself over and over, he didn't really understand or like what she did as a movie
Mm.
star, but he kind of respected that she was successful
Yeah.
and kind of wanted to be back in her life in an interesting way. And I think also, at that point in the book, she's kind of supporting her parents. And I think it was a
Yes.
way for him to kind of like give her something and be like, I do have a use. I made you these like doll houses out of cigar boxes when you were a little girl, and things have gone down since then. But now maybe here's a thing, before I die that we can do together. And so
Right.
I think, it was kind of fun to let him change like that.
Like I said, the ending is the ending is there are no fireworks and dynamite necessarily. It's not like an explosive ending, but I really just I love the ending in the way that it's not an ending in some ways,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's up to the reader to get to figure that out. I would love for you to kind of shout out if you would, if there's any particular bookstores, where we can buy the book and
Yeah.
maybe shout out like your social media info and that kind of contact info as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, there's so many. I would love it if, if people wanted to do an order, a shipped order from like a Chicago bookstore. There's so
Hmm.
many, but like the Bookseller in Lincoln Square, it's Bookseller because it's like they sell wine too, so it's
Uh-huh.
CELL.
Ah.
AR, get it.
Hmm.
I really love them. Women and Children First Bookstore, which is like a feminist bookstore here in Andersonville. They would be a great place to order it from. Exile in Bookville, which is in the Fine Arts Building.
Okay.
Here in Chicago, and then one more. I'm not going to name all the Chicago bookstores. So Chicago bookstores, if you're listening, like don't be mad if I don't say you. That would be here all night. But 57th Street Books and Seminary Co-op, which is down in Hyde Park, I want to shout them out too because
Okay.
they supplied the books for my big event here last September at the American Writers Museum, and they're in Hyde Park, which is where the Museum of Science and Industry is,
Mm.
which is where the Fairy Castle is.
Mm.
So yeah, and then my social media, I'm at Poems While You Wait on Instagram, which is I only publish like the typewriter poetry, and then just Kathleen M. Rooney on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. You can email me. I like to hear from people.
Yeah. We as a an English teacher, I want to say I don't know, it was like 10, 12 years ago, maybe a club or something. We did a one time, maybe for I think it was for Valentine's Day. Like the students did like a poem on demand, for Valentine's Day.
Yeah,
So I mean it was so cool. It was a one-time thing. I wonder about if you can tell us just to kind of end up with tell us a little bit about
yeah.
Poems While You Wait. What's that all about?
Yeah, I love this. This is a great place to kind of like do our starting to send off. So a thing that I loved writing From Dust to Stardust for was it let me think about ways to like re-enchant a disenchanting world. And
Mm.
I love when people do stuff like that. Because I think, without going too far down a dark abyss, like things can seem very, very grim and very hard. And so I love when anyone tries to just like bring the magic back. And so Poems While You Wait, I think at our best, I don't want to pat myself on the back too much, is magic. And what we do is we bring our typewriters, manual typewriters, ultra portable, all
Mm.
different colors, no electricity required, very snappy and cool,
Yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
a public place. And we set them up, and sometimes there's just two of us, sometimes there's like 10 of us. And we put out a little sign up sheet, and people can come up and give us their name and any topic in the world. We say funny, sad, serious,
Mm-hmm.
sexy. It can be a love poem, it can be a poem of vengeance, it can be,
Mm-hmm.
anything at all for your dog, for your mom, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes we do like the a la carte option where it's a $10 per customer. So you give us $10 and then you wander away. Or sometimes the host organization pays for it. Like we just did one 2 weeks ago where
Okay.
it was the Joffrey Ballet's free concert in Millennium Park. So Joffrey paid us a flat rate so that all the people attending the ballet could get a free poem if they wanted
Mm.
to. Not all, but
Sure.
many.
Right. You're not that
Not
quick, but
many.
yeah.
We're not that fast. And then even though we're called Poems While You Wait, we don't want you to literally wait. You can if you want. A
Mm.
lot of people sit and watch, or like some people don't even want a poem. They just like, make a video for Instagram or whatever. But we consider ourselves kind of, we're writers, but it's also, there's like a performance artist aspect to it, where even if you don't
Yeah.
get a poem, you're getting something out of having us here doing this really
Sure.
dramatic form of writing, which is very
Yes.
different than the way you normally write, which is usually
Yes.
pretty like boring and quiet and solitary.
Mm.
And yeah, and then when you come back, you have a one of a kind original poem on that topic. And
Mm.
over the years, I mean, people have really entrusted us with like all kinds of cool topics. I mean, sometimes they're heavy, they're about a death, they're elegies or
Mm.
apologies, or, coming to terms with like a parent who's just got a cancer diagnosis,
Oh
or,
boy.
heavy, heavy stuff. But also
Mm.
sometimes they're just completely silly, like
Mm-hmm.
just totally, totally goofy.
Yeah.
Um, one, person was like, I want a poem about how my roommate keeps eating my food out of the fridge. And we're like, on it. So, so yeah, and I think it's just, people don't expect to see us. To wrap up, it's designed to give people an unexpected and unpretentious encounter with poetry, because I think too often people
Mm.
think poetry is, something that just happens in a classroom or just happens in an
Mm.
academic setting. And I think it's not for them.
Mm.
And it actually is for them.
Wow. Heck of an elevator pitch, more than an elevator
Thank
pitch. That
you.
was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is so cool. Yeah, there's something about I want to say public intellectualism, but that's kind of going against what you're saying. But this idea of
Yeah.
public art, public
Yeah.
creativity is so cool. Performative. Oh man.
Yeah.
Performative often has that negative connotation, but this has
Yeah.
you're right, a
Yeah.
great sense to it.
For the people. Yeah.
For the people. Man. We just went through like 1/64th of your biography and all that you've written and all the different genres that you've touched upon, as well as your teaching and the poems while you wait is so cool. And the book is a heck of a read. Again, From Dust to Stardust. Tell us the publisher again. Yeah.
Yeah, Lake Union Press.
Lake Union Press. We talked about some of the bookstores to buy, Bookshop,
Yeah.
Amazon as well if you need to.
Yep.
So cool talking to you. I love talking to people who just love the written word
Love
and are
it.
pretty darn good at it, to say the least. That's an understatement. So congrats on the book. And thanks again for letting us into the writing lab.
Yeah, and thank you for what you do. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much.